I see you've joined me in the Innovation Lab. Happy Halloween. Innovators, great to see you. Today, we are going to use some materials that you have around home to make a really cool, spooky and creepy substance called Oobleck. So, let's gather everything that we need, then I'm going to show you the recipe, and then we'll talk a little bit about why Oobleck is such a cool substance. Let's get started. All right, innovators, in order to make our Oobleck, we're going to need some basic materials. You're going to need some cornstarch, and you're going to need some water. Now, the recipe calls for 2 parts cornstarch to 1 part water. So, I have here about 2 cups of cornstarch and about a cup of water. You'll need a whisk to mix the cornstarch and water together. If you want to add a little color to it, you can grab some food coloring. And the last thing that you're going to need is a bowl, or in my case, I'm going to use a bucket. So we'll put that right over here. So this is everything that you're going to need in order to make your Oobleck. So let's get started. Innovators, we've gathered all of our materials and now we're ready to start mixing. Again, you just need a large bowl of some kind. In my case, I'm using this nice pail. I like that it has high walls to prevent any kind of mess. So you're going to add your ingredients. The first thing that you'll want to do is start with your water. So I'm going to go ahead and pour the water into my bucket, and then I'm slowly going to add the cornstarch into the water in small amounts, and I'm going to use my whisk in order to mix it. But let's take a closer look so you see how I do it. So my water is already inside of my bucket. Now I'm going to take my cornstarch, and in small amounts I'm going to add it to the water, and I'll mix it. Right, that's looking good. So it'll kind of start off with a milky consistency. And as you add more cornstarch, it'll start to thicken up. So, after 1 cup of cornstarch again, you have this milky consistency. This is now a great time to add your food coloring. Now, innovators and innovator parents, just note that if you do add a little bit of food coloring, you want to make sure that you don't play with your Oobleck on a carpet or on some kind of material that'll stain, because you might have the food coloring come off a little bit from your Oobleck. So I'm adding 1 drop of red and 1 drop of yellow in order to make some cool orange Oobleck. Make sure that you don't add more than just a drop or 2. Okay, give that a mix. And I'll start adding the rest of my cornstarch. And now you really start to feel it thicken up. And as you can see, you want to make sure that the cornstarch and the water are well mixed. I'm actually going to start getting a little messy. I'm going to put my whisk down, and I'm going to start using my hands. Now, the really cool thing is once you start mixing, you should feel these clumps. And this is our Oobleck forming. Okay. And if it's still a little liquidy, I'm actually going to add a little more cornstarch just to thicken it up. Innovators, your Oobleck should be ready. You'll start to notice, and maybe this happened as you mixed it, that the Oobleck has a really weird texture, right? sometimes, especially if you're using your hands, sometimes the oobleck feels like a liquid and other times it feels kind of hard, right? Like there's chunks of something inside of the oobleck. That is why it is known as a non-Newtonian fluid. Now, some of you might be wondering, what does that mean? Well, a non-Newtonian fluid is a fluid that doesn't hold its viscosity or thickness. It's constantly changing, okay? A Newtonian fluid is something like water, right? Water always has the same thickness, right? But not oobleck. Depending on the force that's being applied to it, oobleck can either have a solid state or a liquid state. Let me demonstrate. If I pick up the oobleck, right, and I kind of press it together, it feels pretty firm. It feels like a rock, right? But watch what happens. So, almost feels like clay. But look what happens as soon as I stop applying pressure to it. I'm just going to leave it in my hands, and look what happens. It totally turns liquid and slimy and gooey, right? And what happens if I then start applying pressure to it again? The oobleck becomes solid, right? So this really interesting substance is able to change its viscosity, right? It defies Newton's laws, and thus it's called a non-Newtonian fluid. So let's check out how it acts when we put it on a smooth surface like my work table, okay? Let's take a closer look. Innovators, let's continue exploring and experimenting with our oobleck. So, as we mentioned earlier, oobleck is a non-Newtonian fluid, so sometimes it's kind of liquid and sometimes it's solid. Let's see how it reacts when I put it on a flat surface. Whoa, that's awesome. It becomes this giant puddle, right? And if I put my hand on top of it, look at that. Nothing happens. If I put a lot of force on it, it doesn't get on my hand. Wow, that's super cool. And if I apply force to it, look, I can even clean it up, right? Almost like a solid. What an awesome texture, right? So if you notice, I can pick up the oobleck and it feels really solid, almost like a lump of clay. And if you notice, look, it's not even on my hands. But the minute we stop applying pressure to it, when I put it on the table, it totally becomes liquid. This is an awesome, cool project. It's almost like the oobleck is alive. And it's the perfect Halloween experiment. Now, parents, oobleck can get a little bit messy. I would suggest you work on a smooth table. The great thing about it is you can just take a wet paper towel and very easily clean it up. The more water you add to it, the easier it dilutes and you can dispose of it. I would suggest disposing of it outside once you've mixed enough water into it. Well, innovators, this is awesome. I'm going to keep playing with my oobleck. Solid and liquid. Cool. Innovators, thanks for making oobleck with me. Here's an interesting fact. The name Oobleck actually comes from a Dr. Seuss book. So if you've never read it, go check it out. But thanks for trying out this awesome project, this cool Halloween innovation project. So you have some oobleck that you can experiment with at home. Make sure that you help mom and dad clean up. And remember, innovators, to always think creatively and to think critically. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Happy Halloween!